I was working at a travel agency when an American tourist asked me to book him a train from London to Rome for his afternoon meeting. When I explained that would take about 24 hours, he looked confused and said Europe is small. He saw it on a map. It's like the size of Texas. I showed him an actual map with a scale. He said the map must be wrong because his geography teacher told him Europe was a country. He insisted I was the one confused about my own continent. And that's exactly why this channel exists. To decode the mindset gap most people never even realize they're trapped in. If you value clarity over confusion, you already know where you belong. I was working at a hotel in Paris when a guest asked what language they speak in Europe. I said it depends on the country. She said no. Like, what's the main European language? I explained there are dozens of languages. She got frustrated and said she specifically needed to know the European language because her phrasebook just said European. She'd bought a book titled Basic European Phrases that was apparently just random words from different languages mixed together. She thought I was being difficult by not giving her a simple answer. I was working at a tourism office in Amsterdam when someone asked what the capital of Europe is. I explained Europe is a continent with many countries. He said he knows, but what's the capital city of Europe? I mentioned Brussels hosts EU institutions. He said perfect. So Brussels is like the Washington, D.C. of Europe. When I tried to clarify that the EU is not the same as Europe, he cut me off and said he gets it. It's complicated politics. He just needs to know where the president of Europe lives. He left still thinking there was a president of Europe I was hiding from him. I was working as a tour guide in Germany when an American family asked why Germans don't just speak English like the rest of Europe. I explained that German is the native language here. The dad said he understood that. But for convenience, why doesn't everyone in Europe speak the same language? He'd heard about the European Union and assumed that meant they unified the language. When I explained the EU doesn't control languages, he said that seems inefficient. He genuinely believed the EU was like the United States and couldn't understand why they didn't standardize everything. His wife nodded and said it would make vacations so much easier. I was working at a car rental in Spain when a customer asked for a car to drive through all of Europe in 3 days. I explained that would be impossible. He showed me his itinerary. Day 1, France and Germany. Day 2, Italy and Greece. Day 3, Sweden and Portugal. I pulled up a map and showed him the distances. He said he drives farther than that in Texas all the time. When I explained you can't drive from Italy to Greece without a ferry, he got annoyed and asked why Europe doesn't have better roads connecting their states. He called them states. He thought each country was just a European state with different tourist attractions. Most channels would stop at laughing. I go deeper. Every story here unpacks why these patterns repeat and what they reveal about perception itself. If that distinction matters to you, hit subscribe. That's how you stay 3 steps ahead of the surface-level crowd. I was working at a museum in Vienna when someone asked why Austria still uses its own money instead of European dollars. I explained we use euros. She said no, European dollars, the unified currency. I said euros are the unified currency. She insisted it should be called European dollars because that makes more sense to Americans. When I explained different countries chose their currency names, she said, "This is exactly why Americans find Europe confusing." She seemed genuinely upset that the currency wasn't named with American tourists in mind. She asked to speak to someone about changing it. I was working at a train station in Belgium when a tourist asked which train goes to Europe. I said we're in Europe. He said he knows, but he wants to go to the Europe part with the Eiffel Tower. I explained that's Paris, France. He got confused and asked if France is in Europe or Europe is in France. I drew a diagram showing the continent, countries, and cities. He stared at it for a full minute, then asked if Europe is a state or a country. When I said continent, he replied that his teacher told him continents can't have different languages. He left looking betrayed by the American education system. I was working at a restaurant in Rome when a customer complained that Italian food here tastes different from Italian food in Europe. I said we are in Europe. She said she means real Europe, like Paris. I explained both Italy and France are in Europe. She doubled down and said Italian food in France is more authentic European Italian than Italian food in Italy. Her logic was that France is more central to Europe, so their version is the real European version. She wrote a review saying the restaurant served fake Italian food. She gave us 2 stars for authenticity. I was working at a tourist information desk in London when someone asked if people in Europe celebrate American holidays. I said each country has its own holidays. He asked specifically about the 4th of July. I explained that's an American holiday. He said he knows, but does Europe celebrate it as like a friendship thing? When I said no, he seemed disappointed and said Europe should celebrate it since America helped them in the war. He meant World War II. He thought all of Europe should collectively celebrate American holidays out of gratitude. He called it poor international etiquette that we don't. I was working at a hostel in Prague when a guest asked what state of Europe this is. I said Czechia is a country. She said she knows it's a country, but what state? I explained countries aren't states. She pulled out her phone and showed me a map app that labeled countries as states because she had it set to some weird setting. She said the app proves her point. When I explained the app was wrong, she said apps don't lie, people do. She told other guests I was spreading misinformation about geography. She reported me to my manager for European propaganda. I was working at a chocolate shop in Switzerland when someone asked if Swiss chocolate counts as European chocolate. I said Switzerland is in Europe. He said he thought Switzerland was neutral. I explained that's politically, not geographically. He argued that if they're neutral, they can't be part of Europe because that's taking a side. His reasoning was that being in Europe means you're on Europe's team. When I tried to explain geography versus politics, he said this is exactly why Americans avoid international news. He bought the chocolate but insisted I label it neutral chocolate, not European chocolate. I was working at a bike rental in Copenhagen when a customer asked why Europeans make everything so old-fashioned. I asked what she meant. She said all the buildings look old, and they should modernize like America. I explained these are historic buildings. She said Europe should demolish them and build new stuff, so it doesn't look so much like a museum. When I mentioned these buildings are protected, she said that's why Europe never progresses. She thought the entire continent was stuck in the past on purpose. She asked if there are any parts of Europe that have regular buildings like Target or Walmart. I was working at a pharmacy in Dublin when someone asked for medicine, but specified the American kind, not the European kind. I asked what medicine. He said any medicine, but the American formula because European medicine is weaker. I explained medicine is medicine. He insisted American medicine is stronger because of FDA standards. When I tried to explain Ireland has medical standards too, he said he specifically needs American-strength European medicine. He thought there was a special American section. He left saying he'd wait until he got back to America for real medicine. He'd rather suffer than trust European pharmaceuticals. I was working at a ski resort in the Alps when a family asked if this was real Europe or tourist Europe. I asked what the difference was. They said they wanted to see where actual Europeans live, not the fancy parts. I explained this is where actual Europeans live and ski. The mom said she meant the villages where they wear traditional clothes every day. I explained that's not how modern Europe works. She seemed devastated and said their travel agent promised them authentic Europe. By authentic, she meant a theme park version. She asked for a refund because the Alps were too similar to Colorado. She expected peasants in dirndls. I was working at a bookstore in Edinburgh when someone asked for a map of Europe that shows all the states labeled. I gave him a map with countries. He said no, the states like France state and Germany state. I explained they're countries, not states. He argued that they're too small to be countries, so they must be states. When I showed him the actual size of France compared to Texas, he didn't believe me. He said the map must be using European inches, which are smaller than American inches. He thought the metric system made everything physically smaller. He left to find a map store that uses freedom units. I was working at a castle tour in Scotland when someone asked why Europe has so many castles if it's just one country. I said Europe isn't one country. She said her teacher told her the European Union means it's basically one country now. I explained the EU is an economic union. She said that sounds like one country with extra steps. When I tried to explain sovereignty, she cut me off and said this is why Americans don't trust European news. She believed we were all pretending to be separate countries for tourism money. She asked if the countries have fake borders just for show. She thought she'd uncovered a conspiracy. I was working at a coffee shop in Lisbon when a customer asked if Portuguese people wish they spoke European like everyone else. I said Portuguese is a European language. He said he means the main European language that everyone speaks. I explained there isn't one. He insisted there must be because how do Europeans talk to each other? I mentioned English is common as a second language. He said, perfect. So English is the European language. When I said English is from England, not all of Europe, he said England is in Europe, so that makes English European. He concluded that Americans invented European by giving England to Europe. His logic was completely circular. I was working at a train station in Brussels when someone complained that Europe needs to make their signs more American-friendly. I asked what she meant. She said all the signs are in European and Americans can't read them. I pointed to English translations. She said that's British, not American, and the spelling is wrong. She wanted American English specifically when I explained British English and American English are mutually intelligible. She said, if that's true, why does color have a U? She demanded I escalate her complaint to the European government. She thought there was a centralized European Department of Tourism signs. She wanted to file an official complaint about the letter UI was working at a vineyard in France when a guest asked if French wine is technically European wine or French wine. I said both. He said it can't be both. That's double dipping. His logic was that if France is in Europe, then calling it French wine is redundant because it's already European wine. I tried to explain regional identity. He said that's like calling something Texas wine and American wine, which would be stupid. When I pointed out people do say Texas wine, he paused, then said, that's different because America is a country. He couldn't articulate why. He left convinced Europeans are pre-dating wine marketing. I was working at a tourist office in Stockholm when someone asked how to drive from Sweden to Europe. I said Sweden is in Europe. She said she knows, but how does she get to the main Europe part? I asked what she meant by main Europe. She said the part with the Eiffel Tower and pasta. I explained that's France and Italy. She got frustrated and said those are in Europe, which is where she's trying to go from Sweden. I realized she thought Sweden was next to Europe, but not in it. When I showed her a map, she studied it intensely and said, geography is different in person than on paper. She blamed Google Maps for not making it clearer. I was working at a cheese shop in the Netherlands when a customer asked if Dutch cheese is as good as European cheese. I said Dutch cheese is European cheese. He said he knows the Netherlands is near Europe, but are they in Europe? I asked what Europe meant. He said the main Europe with France, Italy, and the famous countries. I explained the Netherlands is absolutely in Europe. He said it doesn't seem European because it's too clean and organized. When I asked what European means to him, he said old buildings and bad infrastructure. He thought Europe was defined by looking ancient and slightly falling apart. He said the Netherlands seemed too functional to count. I was working at a language school in Berlin when someone asked to learn European. I asked which language. She said just European, the one everyone speaks. I listed several options: German, French, Spanish, Italian. She got annoyed and said she doesn't want to learn multiple languages, just European. I explained there's no single European language. She accused me of gatekeeping and said she knows European exists because her friend went to Europe and everyone spoke European to her. I realized her friend probably encountered people speaking English as a second language. When I explained this, she said that's European. She thought broken English, with various accents, was its own language. She signed up for an English course, still calling it European Lessons. If you've made it this far, you already see the pattern. I don't just tell stories, I map human logic in real time. Subscribing doesn't help me. It helps you not miss the next layer of analysis most people will scroll past.